Hello, Bret. Welcome to the Women Waken podcast.
Hi, Whitney. How are you? I'm glad to be here.
I'm doing fantastic. So exciting to get to sit down with you and have a conversation. We've had some really great conversations already. We just met a
Been
few weeks ago. We're very attuned. We're way out there into all the things, both relatively new to a spiritual path. Would you say what's it been 8 or less years now for you?
are we keeping track of time? I wasn't sure if time was real or not. So
It's not real. So what is it?
I mean, if we're gonna stay on this third dimension, I'd say it probably been about it's actually been about 6 years, 6 or 7. I don't know if it's
Okay.
yeah, it's
You got me beat. You got me beat by about 1 year. 2019 was mine, was my big
okay.
turning point. When was yours?
Gosh, it was really 2017 for me. It was the first time I did dimethyltryptamine, which for
DMT?
those of you that know DMT, that is the full scientific name for DMT. And that blew my mind open, just blew my lid off the casket. And I was like, okay, there's something that's out there that is not on this plane. And that sent me down this rabbit hole of research on everything. And at the time, like your level of consciousness can only find out whatever your brain is, or wherever your brain is mentally at, right? And so for me at that time, I didn't know a ton of stuff about, ancient, Vedic traditions and Buddhism and Hermetic philosophy and astrology. Like that wasn't my world. So for me, I had to just go on this journey, the spiritual path that we all talk about, and figure this stuff out. And I think that's part of life's journey, is figuring out not just how life works and the laws of the universe, but also like why we're here, what we're here to do. And that's really how the path started. And it just keeps getting more and more exciting as I dive into things. It's just starting to become fun. At first, it was scary. It was like, why this, or who controls it all? Like, I had all these questions, and now it's just like, let's have at it.
Yeah, start to have fun with it because it is overwhelming at first. And you think, oh my gosh, what is really going on here? I think that was my big first questions. And I had a few, I don't know if you did, but before I actually had my spiritual opening, awakening, I had a few different moments that elicited that, right? There was a movie that came out 2004. It was called What the Bleep. Did you ever hear of that movie?
I, I don't
Or,
recall it. No.
or like, what the bleep do we know? And it's basically about metaphysics, quantum physics, and the nature of reality. And I watched this as a college student, and I had kind of the same experience where I was like, wait a minute, is reality not what we think it is? And it sent me into all these rabbit holes. But I was still, I was on the traditional path. I was a college student. So I went back to normal life and tried to forget about the weird shit that blew my mind because
Yeah.
um, but that kind of relates, Bret, to your unique experience because you weren't necessarily on a traditional spiritual path or work earlier on in life. You were actually an NFL athlete.
I was, and at times I still feel like I can play, and then I get out there and realize that I go to the gym and I'm like, oh my God, I'm old now. Everything hurts. I'm like, my back.
Yeah, right. They still have like 40. It wasn't what's his name? Tom Brady, isn't he like 45 and he just
Yeah,
finished?
he is around that age, but Tom Brady is, he's a quarterback, and I was a safety, so I would have to tackle
Okay.
guys, run them down, and all that good stuff. But
Yeah.
my whole life was sports. Growing up, I played sports from the age of like 4 to really now. I mean, I still try to keep myself pretty active, but that was like my passion. That was the thing that I loved more than anything, was like football, and that was my identity, was football. It was like, Bret, you're the athlete, you're the football player. This is what defines you. And I did that for a very long time, and then I realized that I couldn't do it anymore. Right, I wasn't capable of sustaining, not sustaining injuries and still being able to perform at the level I needed to, and decided to leave the NFL. And with that, left my identity. So I had to go recreate this new version of who I am. And it's really not a new version. It's just me realizing what already exists inside of me, and that I had suppressed that my entire life, because society tells us that we have to have an identity, we have to have a name, we have to do something, we need to find a career, right? Everybody goes through the school system to be something, where The real school system is that you don't need to be anything because everything that you're trying to be is already inside of you. Right. So I had to really understand that. And that's part of the spiritual journey that I've been on is revitalizing the energy that's within inside of me and truly understanding that everything that we have questions about, everything that we need answers to, everything that we're trying to become is already inside of us. We just need to provoke that lion that's already sitting there. It's just asleep, right? And it could be a lion, it could be a whale, it could be whatever your spirit animal is, but it's already there. And we just have to get quiet and go inside. And so, it's been a long journey from there. And, I just didn't get into, it wasn't just football. And then now I'm in, this, love and relationship coach. It was like football. And then now let's figure it out. And that's what we're all here to do, is figure it out.
Right. I have to ask though, do you feel that I guess for all of us, every day of our life, that spiritual opening, the catalyst for that is kind of rumbling within us, right? Like the beast is stirring at all times, different things can elicit it. And I'm wondering if you felt that at all as a professional athlete, because you're so attuned to your body, and people will, because it's mind, body, soul, right? And everything is equal and has an equal part in our evolution and awakening. And to push yourself to those limits, some people will say that they had an awakening strictly through physical, from pushing themselves through limits, from a total complete focus on athleticism or professionalism. So do you feel like that at all sort of started it? Like, did you feel heightened levels of sensation or connection, like through sports, through athleticism?
Winnie, that's a great question. For me, I think it really comes down to this, is that your level of consciousness can only take in so much at that time, right? And for me, I wasn't even aware. When I say consciousness, I'm talking about awareness. My awareness was at a point to where I didn't even understand any of the stuff that I understand today. So even if I was pulling in certain things where, I may have, insight or foresight to, hey, this may happen, I probably should do X, Y, or Z, I would just, base that on, oh, that's just me being able to, predict it because of how smart I am. Right. Not saying like, oh, okay, maybe I do have certain gifts, right? Certain psychic abilities that we all possess. I didn't even know that that was a thing at that time. I thought it was like, X-Men, if you will. It's like I would watch those movies and I'd be like, oh, that'd be really cool to be able to do these things. But most people don't know that we can do a lot of these things if we truly practice it and get out of our own way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people later on who are become psychics or mediums will say that was already happening. They just called it something else. They thought it was related to something else, but really it was the beginnings of what became their gifts.
Exactly. And that's when you look at a lot of people, we all have these innate gifts, and they may come up in certain places. And just like you said, we call them something different. When you start recognizing them, that's when they start becoming heightened. It's like where attention flow, or where energy goes, attention flows, right? And so the more you put attention on these things, they start to highlight, they start to amplify, right? It's like if I tell you you're great at running, and the more you run, the easier it gets. All of a sudden, you become a great runner, right? Um, it's about focusing your attention on what you want to create, and understanding that there's one premise that this whole world depends on, and it's that the mental is everything, right? Whatever you put in your mind, it plays out in your reality. And if you can grasp that out of any other principle, I don't, the laws of manifestation, and everything else that people have taken from, certain philosophies that have been imprinted in I'd say the greatest underpinnings of history, started with this one premise, which is everything is mentalism. And that's the Hermetic philosophy when you really look at that. And we can go into that too, whenever you want.
Yeah, and we will absolutely. Before we move on though, Bret, I have to ask, because it is unique. Growing up in a football household, my brother played football. My family worshiped football, and people worship football players. And just the idea of getting to the NFL is the holy grail of that sport, which means so much to our world right now. And what I'm curious about is it is and most professional sports are very masculine, which is, and I have to talk about this because it's the Women Waken podcast. So I'm very interested. My calling is about helping to rebalance, is the acknowledgement that we're missing the feminine presence, the feminine energy in so many ways. So I'm just curious about what it felt like to you to reach this goal that so many people revere, right? Oh my gosh, you are in the NFL. Automatically, to a lot of people, you're a star, you're amazing, you're a hero. And what was it fulfilling? Or you, because you made the point about being something rather than someone. And that's actually one of my favorite quotes that was by Coco Chanel, where she said, you begin to live your life when you decide to be someone rather than something. And I think that in itself almost illustrates the way our world is. We're all trying so hard to be something rather than someone. And sorry to keep quoting, but Marilyn Monroe also said of Hollywood, when she became famous, she said, Hollywood is a place where they'll give you $50 for a kiss and 5 cents for your soul. So my point of all this is that you've had the unique experience of having that something title, the ultimate something title. Oh my gosh, they achieved this. What was that like now that you look back on your spiritual path? Do you think that also was a catalyst to make you realize I got this title and I still don't, there's something I still don't feel, or did you feel it? I'm just curious if you could share a little on that.
Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective you have there. I love the way your brain works. Very different than mine. I see why you're running your podcast. Great questions. For for me, I understood that at a very young age, I was able to understand that if you focus on something and put every single fiber of your being into it, you can get to wherever you want. And so when you do that at a very young age, it automatically trains your mind to help you understand that you can accomplish anything. And if I was to say there was one thing about me that allows me to be able to jump into any situation or be able to do anything, it's that one principle, because I saw it, by the time I was 22, 23, right? Where most people will never see the manifestation of the thing that they truly wanted at the highest level, right? Because football, basketball, any professional sport is such a small margin of individuals in this world who play it. Once you get to that point, you understand that you have pretty much outperformed every single person that has done that to this point out of the select individuals that are playing, because there's only about 1,700 people that play in the NFL every single year. 1,700 people, right? There's what, how many people on Earth now? Almost 8 billion. Right.
8.2.
And let's just segregate it to the US and Europe, because most countries don't play football like that. So let's just say there's, 500 million people who are able to even play football, right? So it gives you this almost superhuman perspective on the fact that you can do whatever it is that you want. And that's what the ego either feeds off of or runs off of until it hits a certain point where the ego no longer serves you. And for me, the ego was my best friend getting me all the way into the NFL. And then once I got there, I realized that the ego, or my ego, was my worst enemy, because everything that had gotten me to that point and all the fears and uh the idiosyncrasies that I had within me started to play out in the NFL, right? So, needing attention or wanting to be the best, and wanting the spotlight on me, um, and wanting to show other people that I was this certain persona that I was portraying. That all started to plague me once I got to the NFL, because I was doing things that weren't who I was. It was to impress upon others on what I thought they wanted them to see. Right. It was like to buy these flashy things, cars and jewelry, to, treat women a certain way, to live this certain lifestyle that I saw growing up. Right. Talk about mental conditioning. Right. I saw that growing up from a very young age. I used to race home and watch these music videos and see how these people lived. And I was like, I'm going to live like that one day. And that's exactly what I did. And that's the biggest reason why I probably didn't play as long as I should have, because I wasn't focused on, okay, I got to the NFL, that was the goal. And then it was like, now the goal is to live this lifestyle. And I live this crazy lifestyle, which is great. And I don't take it back for anything, because it got me to where I'm at today. And without that, I don't know if I would have been able to quantum leap to where I'm at today.
Thank you so much for sharing that and for being honest about your experience and what it was like for you. And because it really does, it shows that contradiction between the ego and the soul. And that I do believe that, I guess not, there are many people who are live their whole life, I think, in the ego, who will just find their place there. But I don't believe that it's ever a truly fulfilling life. Just as you described, you can be entertained because you keep chasing after more, right? If you had stayed where you were and, just kept going after the shiny things to look a certain way and present a certain way, you could have stayed there, but something moved you. And I think that there is something to, when we get into the essence of souls, our evolution, that maybe it's that we've been through enough lifetimes that in this one we're able to recognize, because it almost reminds me of my journey in recovery. I've been sober for 10 years now. I struggled with addiction and I had to choose to get sober because I realized this is not the person I want to be. And it was like, you hit a different wall, but I hit the same kind of wall and saying, there's something off here. This is not, I felt disconnected from myself when I was using. And so I realized, I don't think this is what I came here for. And that's when I started my journey back to myself and to moving into my true highest self, which it sounds like you made that pivot and moved towards that. So it's interesting that there are some people, I mean, we're all in different places in our path, right? But I feel that more than ever, there's people on our planet right now that are having that realization awakening of, wait a minute, maybe life isn't all about obtaining the externals or trying to be something that we thought was the ultimate.
First of all, I gotta say that I congratulate you and I'm so proud of you for being able to move out of that, because there's so many people that never do. And they just let it pull them down to where they just don't even recognize themselves and they just give up on life. So it just shows the individual that you are and the amount of, self-perseverance, but also discipline that you have to not go back. Because we all struggle with addiction. It doesn't matter whether it's food, whether it's sex, whether it's self-shame, whatever it is, we all have specific addictions. And most people will live through that their entire life and make excuses as to why they can or why they don't. And so I just want to say thank you for being an example of how to be able to change your life, because we need more of that. And I don't think we have that. But to your question, the ability to be able to move through this so-called awakening, that and really it has everything to do with being able to see, right? Because this is the first time in the really age of humanity that we can now see almost everything, right? And 2024 is going to be a big year for exposure, right? And I can't wait, because
I'm ready. We're both
I'm
ready for it. Here it comes.
yep. You ever
Launch
see
the
that
show.
that gif of Michael Jackson eating popcorn? He's just sitting there smiling in the Thriller. That's
Thriller.
that's me. That's me right now.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot of things. There's several things that are going to get exposed this year, as they got exposed in 2020. And the more that things get exposed, the more that people can't run away from the truth, the more people are going to start to awaken. And that's going to create this cataclysm of, one, people who understand that we can't trust certain entities and certain powers that be. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to start bringing people together, right? Because the number one thing that has plagued us for the beginning of time is division, right? And division is because of fear. If you want to create fear and control in a society, you need to divide. And that's what's happened over these last, call it 300 years. So once the division is gone, and division is not just race, it's also men and women, right? Like the divide right now, that you're seeing this transgender divide. You're seeing these divides between the divine masculine and the divine feminine right now. Like there's all of these different phases of division, and once those barriers kind of fall to the wayside, we're going to start to see that, one, we're going to be able to unite. Two, we're going to be able to coexist. And three, we're going to be able to find love within each other. And that's like, that's later down the road, but that's where things are moving to. And so the more that people are exposed to the truth, the more light that's going to start to come into consciousness right now.
That's such a great point, because that's exactly what I was alluding to, is that I think that's what's happening, is that we've been through the decadence, we've been through the disconnect, and more of us are recognizing it's a dead end and
Yeah.
there's nothing there and it's not the actual truth. And so we become aware of what we've always known deep down. We always know the truth, but we're becoming more aware of it. So that's a beautiful point. So Bret, then to move us along a little, and then we can move on to your current life. But I'm just so curious. It's just your story is, again, is very unique and rich. So I think it's a great perspective, especially with the spiritual twist to it. So when you did end your career, did you have a moment where you struggled with like, what now? Because I've always wondered that about whether it's mostly professional athletes, because they have such a short amount of time. And whether it's like, I used to be obsessed with gymnastics. I wanted to be an Olympic gymnast until when I was in sixth grade, I remember they told me, you're too tall and you're not very good. And I was devastated. But I loved that sport. I loved it. But those girls work 24/7 for the first 18 years of their life. And then they're almost like a racehorse. They're usually, there's some that go on to compete even into their late 20s, but for the most part, that's it until you're 20. So I've always wondered, what does somebody feel like when they've given everything to a sport and then all of a sudden it's done? And then
Mm.
I wonder if that also was a part of your spiritual journey from there.
Gosh, as you were speaking, the first thing that came to my mind was, we have these parts of our lives that we go through, and they're really just, for me, like that was a relationship. And maybe that's probably the best way to explain it and create kind of this analogy, is that this relationship that I had with football was like my love. It was like my first love. And when I was done, it wasn't on my own volition. It wasn't like, hey guys, I'm going to be retiring. Like, I'm not going to be coming back next year. I had a great career. Thank you so much. It was, hey Bret, we're not going to sign you. Bring your playbook in, and we're going to let you go. Like, it was that. And so being on this high, and my career kind of did this. It wasn't, straight and steady. It was like, you know, broke my arm my last game in college. Um, didn't didn't know if I was going to get picked up for the NFL, didn't get drafted, had to try out for the Cleveland Browns, made the team. So boom, this spike up. Then was there on the Cleveland Browns. There's something called practice squad where teams, you just practice with the team, but you don't actually like play the games. They tried to put me on practice squad. So then I was like here, and then I was like, And then the next day I realized that the Patriots picked me up and I was going to actually play in the games. So literally the next day I fly from Cleveland to Boston, and I'm on this high. Right. And so played for the Patriots for 3 years. My first year, I was on this high, and then I got injured at the end of the year. Boom, back down. Right. Then come back next year, super excited, high, get injured, first practice. Boom. Right. Third year, same thing, got injured again. And so I went, on these highs and lows, my whole career. And then all of 2012, I was out the entire season because I'd been hurt for 3 years. I didn't really have a track record because no one had seen me play for 3 years. So I ended up playing in another league outside the NFL, and then got my chance back in the NFL again, 2013. So now I'm on this high. And then, August of 2013, New York Jets let me go. And that was when I had to really think and say, Bret, do you really want to do this anymore? And, I came to the answer of, I don't know, because the money was great. And no athlete, unless you played for a very long time, usually has something they want to do afterwards. It's very rare where athletes like, oh, I know I'm going to jump right into this, or I've been working on this. And for me, I had other endeavors and things that I was doing, but nothing clear and concrete to, where I was able to move into the next phase of my life. And so, it was like this breakup at the time. It was just like this breakup. And it was a breakup where it was like, we can get back together if you want, but the work that's required, I don't know if you're going to be able to do it to be able to sustain it. And for me, I had done it for, almost 4 years, excuse me, at that point. And so I had to really contemplate, hey, is this something that I really want to do again? Right. And possibly not make it again. Right. Because you train for 4, 5, 6 months, and then hope to get the opportunity to play. And I'd done that for a year and a half. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And so at that point, it was this breakup. And then for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years, really 5, was this, am I really over it yet? Right? Am I really over her or him? Right? And it was these withdrawals, this, oh, I don't want to look at football. I don't, for the first 3 years after playing football, I didn't watch a game. Like people were like, oh, come to the game, come to the bar, let's watch. Never. I never wanted to watch football. I never turned it on by myself because it was painful. Just reminded me of a lot of things. I didn't even watch myself like play, like old film and stuff. I would never watch it because it was painful, because it didn't end the way that I wanted it to end. And it wasn't really until I started to go through this spiritual awakening that I became okay with how my NFL career went. Because anytime something doesn't go the way that you want it to, which, is, part of, the shadow, the expectation of us thinking something's supposed to go a certain way, you hold on to that vision of it was less than what it was supposed to be. So now I am not enough. And I held on to that vision for a very long time. And I was very envious of a lot of people who had that, where they had a big contract, or went to a Super Bowl and won a game, where they did these things where it was like the pinnacle of where I wanted to be. And I had to realize that where I'm at today wouldn't have happened. I wouldn't have been able to get to where I'm at today and be able to help all the people that I've been able to help if I didn't go through that. And so my greatest failure became my biggest success once I flipped the way that I perceived the situation or the experience that happened. And that's truly the greatest example of how perception shapes your reality. Does that make
Completely.
sense?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And thank you, Bret. One, for sharing again your story and for illuminating for us what that experience is like. Because again, it's something that most people don't ever know. Yet I think everybody to some degrees knows that feeling of deep disappointment and despair around this wasn't how it was supposed to happen. And that kind of, whether it's regret or remorse, can take people down. People will go the rest of their life just this forever almost imprisoned by choices they made, by defeats they had. And that's been a big catalyst for me in my spiritual journey as well, because it's what really, between the addiction and that feeling of this wasn't what was supposed to happen, things went wrong, I messed things up, it was killing me. It literally felt like an imprisonment. And I thought, this can't be how we're supposed to live. There has to be something about my beliefs that I'm holding around these things that happened to me that are caught. It's not what happened itself. That was its own entity, right? Its own thing. It's what I believe about it that's killing me and keeping me from being happy, from enjoying life, from enjoying and appreciating who I am. And so that was a big part for me. And then more recently, I've been able to do what you just said, which is not only was it okay that those things happen, but they actually, well, I believe there's things that we signed up for when we came into this life to experience, knowing that they would be the turning point, the catalyst for our biggest progress and evolution. Because without those moments, I like to call it grit, the times where it's like the gears are at the highest level and we're like, holy shit, this is so freaking hard and I can't get through this. That's when we change. The easy breezy flowy times are just the joyride part, which are wonderful, but it's
Right.
not when we're growing. So it's through the worst things that happen to us that we gain exactly what we came here to do, which is our true understanding of who we are and what this is really all about. And that's why I appreciate the more people like yourself who share their stories honestly, because the more people that hear it, just as you said, they're going to think, wait a minute, maybe that's true. Maybe I can let myself off the hook. Maybe I can let this regret go and start looking forward instead of being obsessed with the past.
Oh gosh, talking about the past. That is, if you're holding on, there's 3 things. And my buddy talks about this all the time. There's 3 things that if you're holding on to will, or it's the fastest way to just a miserable life. If you're holding on to shame, regret, or guilt, those 3 things can pull any person down and stop them from moving forward. And for me, I held on to all 3 of those things, right? Shame for, certain things that came up during my NFL career, guilt for not doing better, and regret that I wish I could have been better, and I lived in that for, almost 4 or 5 years. And even though I was very confident mentally on the under in the underpinning of my subconscious mind, that was still there. And that showed up in work. It showed up in my relationships. It was this need to be something or feel like I had to make my life of some substance, to where it was in a very similar lane of football, which is why I chose to do things after football that kind of correlated to that in the business world, right? Like, working and running for, running a private aviation company, which is like, you know, creme de la creme of society. You're flying on private jets, and you're doing, you're working with all these extremely wealthy individuals and getting into wealth management, and so on and so forth. I was doing all these things to create this lifestyle that I thought I needed to maintain, or almost exude to the public, and a lot of that just came from me not being enough for myself, right? And not truly loving who I am. And that's really what the path of enlightenment really is. It's this journey of reawakening your heart and fully loving yourself, every part of you, not just the good stuff, but the stuff that, and there's no good or bad. It's just the stuff that you may perceive as something you don't like, and embracing that. If you start doing those two things, very quickly your life can shift in a very different way. And that's part of this journey for me, is embracing that love, and helping others embrace that love, because it is there's only one cure to everything in this world, and it's unconditional love.
Absolutely. So then it sounds like from there, it was when you took the DMT that you actually were like, okay, maybe there's other pathways. Maybe it doesn't have to be related to whether it's, the pursuit of money and being, staying in the realm of what you were in before. Was that the turning point? Like, what was your first spiritually adjacent or involved work, lifestyle pursuit that you had that brought you closer to where you are now?
I mean, I think it's all part of, there's all these parts of your life, and they're all pointing in the same direction. You just don't know it at the time, right? So like the NFL was pointing me to this, because without the NFL, I wouldn't be able to jump into this, right? Like running several companies pointed me to this. Being in certain relationships pointed me to this. And so they've all been this coalition of the willing, if you will, to be able to transcend me to this point. And each step just was a greater stepping stone to the pyramid of where I'm ultimately supposed to be. And I feel like we're just ultimately discovering it every day. We continue to show up in the way that we're meant to, right? Because there's a lot of people that show up. And when I say meant to, I mean, we show up in a way to where we are completely in alignment with our highest and greatest self. There's so many people that wake up every day and have no clue who they are. It's the best way is literally, watching the movie The Matrix. That is literally the best way to see how most of America wakes up. And it's this path of how can you start to tap into who you're truly supposed to be. So to answer your question, Whitney, it's all been a culmination of events to get me to this point, but the true awakening really occurred once I did the DMT ceremony. I started to realize that there's something greater out there outside of me. And I also started to realize it piqued my interest. I think that's probably the biggest thing that a spiritual experience does for most people that haven't had anything like that, right? Like it piqued my interest. And for somebody like me, once my interest is piqued, it's game over, because now I got to figure it out. Like I got questions and I need answers.
The Libra in you.
It's the Libra in me. I'm like, I need answers. I need to balance this shit out. Like I can't have all these questions with no answers. And so I literally was like, at the time, of a buddy of mine named Stephen Kotler, who is like 9 times best-selling author, has written several books. He wrote this book on flow, or several books on flow. And one of his books was called Stilling Fire. And in this book, he was working with Navy SEALs, and they were putting him in these hyper or these deprivation tanks, and playing, certain frequencies and allowing them to condense learning languages from, months into weeks, because they had to deploy them into different countries. And, they were using all of these different elements, such as, their DMT experiences and things like that. And so that was kind of like my first, like, okay, let me start reading this. And then so I got into flow. Right. And I ended up, it's funny because I literally read that book. My business partner was like, hey, you should read Stealing Fire. I was telling him about the DMT experience. And he was like, you should read Stealing Fire. So I read that. And then I followed him on Twitter. And then he messaged me and was like, hey, I'd love to meet. Right. So I ended up meeting him, and I ended up I work with him now, which is great, with the Flow Research Collective, which is the largest scientifically backed research company on neuroscience and flow. And so, it's just funny how the world comes together. So like, then I was like all flow. I was like flow and peak performance and high performance. How do you do the unimpossible, or the impossible, I should say. And then as I was doing that, I was still going through these kind of shifts. So, I started doing breath work. And then that was a whole other thing, because I was like, hold on, how can I do this just breathing? Right? Not the same experience as DMT, but a very life-changing experience at the time. And I'm like, wait, I can do this with my breath. So that happened. And then I started doing DMT ceremonies every quarter. And there was the third time I did it. And I was doing it at my best friend's place, who is an incredible being. His name is Curtis Lee Thomas. He's the number one mindfulness trainer in the country right now. He's done breath work with NASA and Nike. He's a hell of a guy. And I sat down with him, and he was like, hey, I'm going to take you to this different dimension today. And I was like, what do you mean? I was like, we do that every time. He's like, no, no, no. Today's different. He's like, today I'm taking you somewhere else. And so I'm like, all right, sign me up. I'm like a kid in a candy store. They'll tell me, they'll get me excited. So, literally, he lays me down, and I go through the experience, and I come out, and he's like, how was it? And I was like, it was good, but it was very similar. It wasn't what you said. He was like, oh no, I didn't give you enough. Lay back down. So he lays me back down, and I go, and when I lay back down, I normally, I know I'm at his place. Normally I know that I'm Bret. I'm in LA. When he laid me back down, I didn't know Bret. I didn't know where I was. I wasn't anything. I literally disappeared into pure light. And that was my first experience at being just pure consciousness. And the best way I can explain it was like I was taken out of my body, and I went to see the all, right? Whoever, God, whatever you believe, the creator, the almighty. I literally went to see her or him or both, because we'll call it whatever we want to call it. And it was like being reborn and showing me why I'm meant to be here. And normally, I'm laying down, on the sofa, and I'm not really moving. This time, like, my whole body was moving, my arms were moving. It was almost like a kundalini sort of awakening. And when I got back, I was a different person. And that was the first time, and that was probably like 2019, 2018, 2018. That was the first time. And it was so funny, because that day I had gotten let go from the wealth management company that I was working for. Right. And so I was kind of bummed out about that. Right. There's a whole journey in that, and a whole bunch of lessons within that. I was there for like a year and a half to 2 years. And I had just gotten let go. And I had this session that day. And when I left my buddy's place, I was completely okay with everything in life, because I understood why I was here. And that's
This
when the
was
light,
DMT.
this was DMT. And this
I
is
need
when
to
the
get
light,
on that guy's sofa. I want to take that trip.
you don't listen, that trip is different, and you'll love it. But like, I've invited certain friends, to meet him, because he's a very special being. And for those that don't understand that there's another way of life, there's another whole other dimension out there, and dimensions, I should say. For someone who's stuck in this reality, to be able to have your consciousness shaken like that, you almost can't figure out life after that. And that's when the awakening starts. And that's what happened to me. It was like it jolted me. Like I was the most results driven, focused, money making, guy, all about success that you ever met. And when I did that, I was like, wait a second, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this stuff? And when you start asking why, that's when it starts. And for me, that's when that third DMT session is when it blew my socks off. And crazy story. So I've never had any, I've never seen any ghosts or had any spirits, now I have, but at the time it's like I never felt any spirits. And that next morning I was at my ex's place at the time, and I was showering, and I just had my grandparents who had passed pop into my mind, as well as a cousin who passed, who popped into my mind. And I started kind of crying in the shower for whatever reason. I don't know why. And when I got out, I was in the bedroom and I was getting dressed, and there's this ceiling fan that, I don't know if you can see it. There's a ceiling fan right here, but the ceiling fan where, you hit a remote and the light has to go on. Right. And I know for a fact you have to hit the button to turn the ceiling fan on, because that's how it works. You can't hit a switch. You have to hit the button. So I'm getting dressed, and all of a sudden the light flickers on, flickers off, flickers on, flickers off, flickers on, and stays on a third time. Right after I was just thinking about my two grandparents and my cousin. Now, that time I was freaked out. I was like, what the hell? I picked the phone up. I called my buddy. I was like, yo, what does this mean? I told him. He was like, yeah, bro, you're
What'd you
tapped
do
in.
to me?
He was like, you're tapped in right now. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ready to be tapped in like this just yet. But it literally, those experiences, that experience right there was really the main catalyst to like, okay, like now let's figure it out. And then we go, right after that we go into a pandemic, and I'm still moving through what I want to do and how I want to serve. And right around 20, like into 2021, not beginning of 2021, I started working with this naturopathic doctor. And this doctor, she's very spiritual and great friend. And she was like, you should look at this book called Gene Keys. And I was like, Gene Keys. And I was like, what's that about? And she's like, just take a look at it. It's a really good book. It kind of shows you like who you are and this and that. And I was like, really? I was like, all right. So I picked that book up, and then right around that time, I had just broken up with my ex. And so this was like February 2021. And so I had this past life regression at the time. Right. And in the past life regression, I went back to a past life in Italy. And this was, or I should say, ancient Rome, if you will. And I was a sculptor. And it's funny because the shaman who's doing the past life regression asked me, what is your, she's like, what do you love about your job as a sculptor? And I said, politicking with the royal elites. Like that came out of my mouth. And I'm like, what the hell? Who says that? Right. And so, so I'm like going through this. And then like shortly after that, I had a reading with a friend who's a psychic medium. And she says, one, you're supposed to be working with boys, young men. You're supposed to be a guiding light and mentoring them. And then secondly, she was saying that, I don't know if you know this or not. And well, let me back up. Let me backtrack to the past life regression. So when I said politicking with the royal elites, well, I'm going to fast forward. Sorry, I'm jumping all over here. So she goes, and you may not see this, but in 5 years, I see you being in politics. And I was like, politics? I don't know. I don't care about politics. I have a political science degree from UCLA, which I never ever use. But I'm like, politics. She's like, you may not just she, and she was saying it's not because of the fact that I want to be in politics, but in the fact of where politics are heading. And she was saying that everybody in politics right now is in it for reasons other than truly helping humanity. And she said that because of your heart and the way that your heart functions, in when she's saying my heart, she means my soul. She's like, they need someone who can lead, who has a heart like yours. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So in fact, so keep going through 2021, like I meet this celebrity psychic medium at a Grammy party here in LA. And I'm like, oh, I'd love to get a reading from you. So I have a reading from her. And she sits me down or this is over the phone. And, we're talking about, what I should be doing for work. And she was like, do you want to write a book? I was like, I've thought about it, but I don't really like writing. It's tedious. She's like, well, let's figure out why you have resistance to writing. So I'm like, okay. So she's like, I'm here with Saint Germain and Jesus. And she was like, okay, so in one of your past lives, this was, long ago, you were very high up in the church. And at that time, the church was politics. And you didn't believe in they wanted to use the devil to punish people. And you didn't believe in punishing people. And you were very outspoken. So in one of your past lives, you got put in jail for your whole life. And then in another past life, you had both your hands cut off because you were a great writer, and you had both your hands chopped off so you couldn't write. Right. And so like obviously we're on the your podcast here where this is making sense to a lot of people, but to most people this wouldn't make sense. But if we work through the timeline, it's like you had this past life regression in ancient Rome where you were a sculptor and you enjoyed politicking with the royal elites. You had one psychic tell you that you're going to be in politics. You had another psychic tell you that in your past life you were very high up in politics and you were put in jail because you're outspoken, right? Which at that time, if you're high up in politics, that was ancient Rome. Right. So I'm seeing like all these things connect. And I'm like, normally, for me, I'm a skeptic. And for me, it has to make sense and that's at that time. Now it's somewhat changed, but it had to make sense. And it started all to make sense and unravel in a certain way to where I'm like, okay, I get it. And that's when I was like, I'm all in and I got to figure this shit out. So I know I was long winded, but I wanted to make sure I made all that connect for you.
Absolutely. And it completely connects. And that's absolutely fascinating. Do you think you would have been as open to it a few years earlier before the DMT if you'd done a regression and people told you that? Do you think you'd kind of brush it off? Because it sounds like it almost like you kind of felt like, yeah, that makes sense. I get it. I feel okay. Because you said you're all in. We're only all in when we feel like, yes, this is aligned with the steps that I meant to take. I'm going to go for it.
Yeah, it's tough to be all in when you don't know what all in means at that point, right? So like if I did a past life regression, before I went through the DMT experience in breath work, I wouldn't even know how to tap into, my higher state, because that's really what I was doing in the past life regression, was tapping into another state of who I am, and then letting things channel through. I never knew what channeling was, so I would have just been in my head trying to say whatever I was saying, right? So to answer your question, yeah, I wouldn't have been able to do that, and that's why all of the work that leads up to the grandiose thing that you are becoming is so important, right? Don't skip on the meditation. Don't skip on learning, whatever interests you at the time, whether it's tarot, whether it's astrology, whatever it is, whether it's human design. Don't skip on that stuff, because all of that stuff leads up to where you're going. And it's all part of your journey. So whatever is calling you, that's your soul telling you that, hey, this is something that's going to unlock the next chapter of where you're supposed to be. And so those are synchronicities, those are signs from the universe that, hey, this is what's supposed to happen. So I don't question as much as I used to. I used to be like, well, why? Well, how? Well, when? And now I'm like, okay.
So
Okay.
true. And that's been a blessing for me as I've moved on my path. And it's really only gotten much better like this year. But I've always been the type that's like, all right, but what's the point of this? Like why, okay, why did this have to happen? Why did I have to learn this if it's not a part of the bigger? Everything is a part of, as you said, the bigger picture purpose. And especially once you're on your spiritual path, you're getting this higher guidance that has the bird eye view. It knows the exact turns you have to take to get to where you ultimately are going to go. And it's not always linear, and it may not always make sense at the time, but just the way that you were saying, looking back, even at your NFL career, now you can say, yeah, it makes sense. It was a catalyst. It was something, if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here. And it's true. And I think it's important for anyone listening to hear that, because I know throughout my spiritual journey, I thought, well, I'm stuck. This is not helpful. This isn't doing anything, but it really does. Everything we delve into is contributing to, because it actually is fascinating. We think about what it means to gain greater knowledge or wisdom or understanding. It's like because truths, as they say, it's like an onion. Like you do one layer and then it just reveals more.
Yeah.
And I've heard it said that, even God, source, whatever you want to call it, is always ever expanding. So even like the whole is gaining greater understandings of everything at all times, which is a really big concept. But for us, it's like we're tapping in a little bit more to all the wisdom of the universe is what it ultimately is. And for humans, it's a long way because we know so very little in our little human brains. And so as we sort of open up and have our minds expanded, every single step counts.
It does. And we're not supposed to know everything. That's the mistake or the misnomer that we all, come here, and that's part of what school teaches us, right? Getting A's and, taking SATs and going to college. You think you're supposed to know everything, right? If you don't, now you're stupid or you're dumb or whatever, however you want to call it. But, and I really believe this. I don't believe we know anything, because every single year I live, something that I thought I knew, there's new information that comes out that trumps what I thought was the truth, right? So I truly believe that we don't really know anything. And even if we look at and try to depict history, like we're pulling through hearsay, we're pulling information through hearsay. No one was there. No one was living. Most of the ancient wisdom has been destroyed. And so people have tried to pass it along, and people have written on tablets and scrolls and things like that. But it's always been translated by somebody else. It's like if I wrote a message to you and then I said, write that same message to the next person and pass it down, to 200 people. By the time that last person gets that message, it's going to be completely different than when I wrote it to you. Right. So I think we have, certain things that we can draw on and draw perspectives on, but I don't truly know if we really know everything. And I'm welcome to opinions and I'm welcome to insights. And I just draw what feels right, and if I'm sharing something, it's my opinion. It's never in truth and fact. It's just where my journey is and where it's led me, and I try to not be an expert in anything, because to be an expert means that you know it all. Even in the NFL, even in football, when I'm working with my guys, I run a, youth football academy here in Los Angeles. And when I'm working with them, I'm always looking for different ways of doing something because I truly don't know it all. Right. I truly try to approach my life as being a student to life. Right. And allowing life to teach me these lessons that are important along my journey, and hopefully passing them along to someone else who can use it on theirs.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I will say though, I do think we know some stuff. And here's why. So I also heard this analogy where have you ever seen one of those pictures where they show like a super magnified picture of, let's say, an elephant, and the person looks at it and they say that's just, it's just like a gray block. It's a brick maybe because it's close up. And then they pull it back and they say, "Oh, that actually looks like it might be the part of a body of an animal." So it doesn't make your first observation false. You knew something, but you just didn't see the bigger image, and you have to keep pulling back. And to me, that's what gaining knowledge is what you first thought was also true. But guess what else is true? You're actually looking at a whole ass elephant. It wasn't just this one brick, it was a bigger thing. And that's what's so exciting about the spiritual journey is you can have a year where, like you said, you're obsessed with astrology or gene keys, and then you learn something else that feels like another layer, and you're like, oh damn,
Yeah.
that wasn't even the whole truth before. Now I know even more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I listen. This is the Libra that's going to come out of me because I'm very competitive. So I'm always going to challenge. I'm always going to
You're like,
challenge.
no more. Yeah.
No, but you there. Listen, I truly believe that we've come a long way. Do I think that we understand the universe in its full capacity? No. Do I think we ever will? I don't ever think we will get there. And when we do get there, I think that we will be long gone.
Mhm.
Right, in terms of being in this body, in this body on this planet. And as you point out, when you zoom out, you start to see that what you thought, whatever that object was, is now a completely different object. Right. And so it's like, well, were you right or were you wrong? And I don't think there's a right or a wrong. It's just the perception of where you're at. Right. And so what I'm saying is that the level of consciousness that we're at has significantly trumped where we started, right, as Homo sapiens, but we still have a long way to go. And as we continue to discover and learn and move through energies and information, I think we're going to start to uncover some really interesting things that are going to make life a lot more fun and significant.
Absolutely. I can't wait. Makes
I'm
it
excited.
exciting
I'm
to
very
be here and to
excited.
be around.
I
So
know.
speaking of that, let's talk about where you are at right now. What is exciting you, tantalizing you in terms of what you're pursuing? I know that you're a transformative love and relationship coach. So that's definitely something that you are focusing on work wise that you're now helping others with, which, as you said, the only true thing is unconditional love. So I think it's probably why you're aligned with coaching around love, because if we can get that component, everything else we kind of falls into place because then we get into the flow.
Yeah, it's flow, love, whatever you want to call it. There's when you really look at the way that we live and when I say the way we live, like where we live from, there's only two places that people live from. We either live from true, genuine, unconditional love, or we live from fear.
Mm.
There's no other place, right? So how you show up is one of the two. And so for me, as I started to dive into the gene keys, which, for those of you who aren't familiar with the gene keys, because this isn't something that is just readily out there like astrology and human design. I know this is a little bit more esoteric, but what the gene key system it's a system that's kind of blended the Chinese I Ching, which is a ancient Chinese book, esoteric book, if you will, spiritual book that has pretty much predicted every single cycle of our times, and it's combined that with astrological birth data, so your birth date, as well as human design. Right. So it's taken all three of these major systems and it's combined them into this personalized map that is pretty much your own genetic profile of self-improvement. So it uses 64 different universal archetypes to help you move and understand behaviors and just different potentials of who you can be as a human being. And for me, I've taken a likes to it because, again, I had a lot of questions and I needed answers, right? And I started to read this book, and that's when I started to get every single question that I had answered. And it wasn't just about my questions, but it was about all the questions that other people had and giving me insights into an understanding that I don't think I've ever read in any other book, right? On from the beginning of time to where we're at today, from Buddhism to Christianity to Catholicism, you name it. Talks about Buddha, talks about Christ, talks about Vedics, talks about Kundalini yoga, right? And it's given me this worldly insight into this spiritual, this metaphysical world, if you will, that has allowed me to completely alchemize myself as well as transform other people like I've never had before. Because before I was doing, love and relationship coaching, I was doing peak performance coaching and I was doing business coaching. Right. So I understand the coaching element, I understand the transformative element, but this is on a whole nother level. And once you start tapping into this, you start to really leave the matrix and you truly start to embrace who you are. And that's really what the gene key system allows you to do, is it allows you to embrace who you naturally are, who you're innately here to be, not the lawyer, not the financial advisor, not the football player, but the God or the goddess that's within you, and bring that forth.
Yeah. Amazing. And so you're able to use that with the people that you work with as a transformative love coach. Now, is this individual work you do, or is it with couples or both to help them see where they might be, like you said, kind of moving towards more of a forced element rather than what they naturally can flow with?
Yeah, great question. So right now, I tend to lean more towards groups. And then within the groups, we do have individual kind of breakout sessions. I have done some one-on-one coaching. However, it tends to not move the needle as much because to move through love and the confines of the heart, it requires you to be able to, one, be very gentle, two, be very open, but three, to have almost a support group to be able to help you move through that. And if you don't have someone there to support you the whole time, it becomes somewhat challenging. And for me to be supporting someone, the way a group can support someone, requires a heavy lift, right? And so people who do have the means to bring me in and do that, then by all means, yes. But for the most part, it's been normally groups because of the community element, and there's no greater way than people being able to lift others up, right?
Absolutely. I'm curious,
Yeah.
working in love and coaching for relationships, do you believe in soulmates?
Ah, that's such a sticky question. You're gonna get me in trouble
With who?
with your listeners. Oh my gosh. So I do believe in soulmates. I believe in twin flames as well. And this is a very again, this is a concept that gets, I think, misconstrued. And again, this is in my opinion, but I believe that every relationship that we have is in its own right a lesson for us to learn. Now, how do we know whether that's our twin flame or if that is, our soulmate, which are two completely different things, right? Your soulmate is someone who usually comes into your life. It's a very difficult relationship, some of the most challenging relationships you have in your life. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a romantic partner. It can be a mother, a brother, a sister, right? It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be romantically. And that's the confusion that I think we make in love is that, oh, I'm dating this beautiful, handsome man. Is he my twin flame? And a lot of times it's not. And this is the biggest thing that I think when I was learning about soulmates and twin flames that I learned is that your soulmate, or excuse me, your twin flame may not even be on this planet, right? Because it's your soulmate, which is different than your twin flame, is really just a split of who you are, right? It's a split of the masculine and the feminine, and those archetypes have been living out their lives on this planet. Now, once you've found or you've truly ascended and come back in alignment with the all, you may have transcended. You may not even be here anymore, right? And so, I know it's a concept that's somewhat esoteric to comprehend, but they may not even be on this plane. And so, there's a lot of work that's required to be able to do to be able to understand, if this is my twin flame. I would work with, some people that you trust who are, have some abilities to be able to see this stuff. If you have some questions surrounding that. And then I would also really use your intuition to tap into that, because again, you could be right or you could be wrong, depending on how you're trying to manipulate the situation and on what you want, right? Being able to take in information and find the truth requires you to have an open mind and not sway one way or the other, right? And that's the hardest thing for us as humans, because our conscious mind typically wants something, right? And that's why the ego death is so important when doing a lot of this work, because if the ego comes into any of this, right? I've worked with psychic mediums in the past where their ego was involved and they gave information that wasn't necessarily the best information for me because they were giving it from what they thought as opposed to what it was, right? So, um, to answer your question, I do believe in soulmates. I do believe in twin flames. I think that each and every one of us, it's up to us to discern what that relationship is for us and how that relationship is going to impact our life.
Definitely. Definitely. And there are many, just as twin flames, many different types of soulmates, because it is really just somebody that does impact
Yeah.
our lives and that we are walking this soul path with, and they're significant. I personally believe in the idea that most people who are soulmates are people that we've had many lives with. We've been around before, which people might know that feeling, which I'd be curious to know if you ever had it, where you meet somebody or you're friends with somebody where you just have this sense of, this isn't our first rodeo. Like, we've done this before.
Yeah, I've had that. I mean, my girlfriend, my ex-girlfriend in the NFL, I mean, we were on and off for like 6 years. Like I could not get away from this woman. And I was like, now that I'm looking back on it, I'm like, there, there's something there. I haven't gone to the depths of saying, hey, was that my twin or soulmate? But it was a very difficult relationship and I just couldn't get away. And I've had certain people like that in my life to where I've tried to get away from and I just couldn't. So they're so tough to just get through and learn. But every relationship is an opportunity for you to have a better relationship with yourself. And I truly believe that.
What would you say is one of the biggest revelations you've personally had, especially after a relationship like that, which most of us know, the ones that are those, on and off, in and out, intense. What have you come out of that, especially now as a coach, as a big revelation about love and relationships?
That was such a long time ago for me. That was like almost I'm a little less than 10 years ago, which I've dissected that relationship at length. And for me, that relationship was a opportunity for me to be able to move through a specific archetype that I was dealing with at the time. And I don't believe I moved through that, which is why the next relationships in my life had the same thing, right? Of me having to honor myself so that I can honor the relationship. And that's kind of been my theme throughout, I think, all of my relationships in life is being able to honor myself so that I can honor my relationship. And I think a lot of us misconstrue what a true relationship is in the dynamic of a relationship because and correct me if I'm wrong, you tell me this, right? Because you're a smart gal. When you're in a relationship with someone, how do you view the relationship, the dynamic? Do you view it as like a duality? How do you look at that?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I don't know if this is what you're asking about, but I know in my previous relationships that did not work out, I realized that I almost had my own, it was separate. I was almost in my own story and narrative. And that's why it didn't work out because rather than recognizing that, okay, we're doing this together. So I need to share with you how I'm feeling, what I'm assuming, what I'm thinking. I would just start to tell myself, like, oh, I knew it there, this is how it's going to go. And this is how they feel. And I had multiple people that I dated early on in my life that said, stop assuming that you know what I think and feel. Stop telling me how I feel. Cause that's what I would do. Cause again, it was separate. So I think that there can be too much duality in relationships. And it's usually is when people are too attached to their own insecurities and fears or their ego. They want their needs met. They feel not valued if they don't get all their needs met. That's why it's hard to imagine how people do relationship without the spiritual component. Because then when it's almost just all ego, it's like metal against metal. It's just you're just grinding against, you know what I'm saying? Love is love. So it can even be present in the most dire of situations, but it's really hard to have a functional relationship when two people are just trying to get their own needs met and not communicating effectively.
Totally. I completely agree with that. And so you would call it more of like a dualistic sort of dichotomy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest mistake that most people make in relationships. Because when I look at a relationship, and this was something that, the Gene Keys pointed out, and this is when the light bulb went off. I was like, oh, okay. A relationship is a trinity, right? It's a three. Okay. Because you have yourself, and then you have your partner, and then you have the relationship itself. Right. And if you don't feed the relationship the same way you feed yourself, then the relationship it can't continue because there's no growth. There's no energy, right? If you were to put it in a box, there's no energy going into that relationship. So a lot of times people focus on me and her or me and him, right? And all of a sudden the relationship dies because there was not enough energy to consist between just you focusing on you. And that's the biggest mistake that I think that most people make in relationships is they don't build a relationship. They just build a me. And I hope that he or she builds herself or himself. Right. So that's the biggest thing that I tend to focus on with my clients is helping them build the relationship by building themselves and then building the relationship secondly, because there's no way to build. It's like, flying on a plane. I know you've heard this several times, but when they give you the oxygen mask, right? Check, put yours on first before you put, the person on next to you.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. It's like, if you don't build yourself up the right way, then there's no way to build the relationship. And there's a lot of people who are in relationships right now who have never built themselves up, who have built themselves up on fear, who have gotten complacent in the way that the dynamic of the relationship has been for 5, 10, 20 years. And now they're trying to change. Right. And it's usually the woman because they're waking up right now and they're like, I don't like this relationship. Excuse me. They're like, I don't like this relationship. And they realize that the partner that they want is not the partner that they're with. And the biggest issue when I look at it was the partner that they're with was never the partner that they wanted. And I'm like, but at the time, that was what you thought. Or at the time, you made that decision based on fear, based on not being with someone, being in a really dark place and finding this knight in shining armor that you thought was the person at the time, and then being in this relationship and then coming to a point where you want to be, taken care of a certain way, when you want someone to show up for you emotionally a certain way, for someone to be open to having conversations and dialogue with you in a certain way that has been different than before, but this is who this person is. Right. So there's this conflict in that I've been seeing just with clients in how they are, how the relationship dynamic is going. And then on the flip side of that, now, you have single men and women who are so independent and so almost afraid of losing independence that they don't want to be in a relationship. Right. It's like, I want to do, especially, people who are more spiritual. They're like, I want to do more work. I want to do the work. I want to do the work. I want to do the work. And they keep running from the relationship. It's like, you can only do work for so long and then you got to test the work out. You got to take the test.
And that's what relationships are the best for. They will test the shit out of you. Everything you thought you'd accomplished and healed, a relationship will tell you otherwise.
It will tell you, it will slap you, up and down, you're like, what and how and why. But that is the greatest chance for you to move to the next part of who you're supposed to become. Because everything in your life is relationships. The basis of your life, of how happy you are, how joyful you are, is usually based on relationships. Right now, I'm not talking about Buddha and, transcending and being, a Tibetan monk. I'm not talking about that, right? Different. But for most people, the greatest life that you can have is having a life of beautiful, loving relationships. And so that's really what I invite people to do, is to invite an openness to all of the relationships that you have in your life and take a hard look at them and see how each one of those relationships in your life are going, and figure out, are they truly what they should be and what they can be? And then finding acceptance in that, because some relationships are going to be what they're going to be, right? You may have a relationship with your mother or your father, or, a partner, an ex-partner that's still in your life. Maybe you have kids with them, and the relationship is just what it is. And so it's your job to find the meaning in that relationship, but find the love in that relationship, because the greatest art of love is finding a way to love something even though you possibly can't. Right? Like, how can you love something that is just so despicable that you could not love it? Right? And that's what we're all here to learn, is how to move through that. And that is the hardest thing to do. And the best way to test if you love unconditionally, and I know you're in the middle of like New York, so there's not a lot of traffic, but I'm in LA. So the best way to figure this out is go out in the 405 or the 10, in rush hour, and get cut off and see if you still love that person. Or if you're saying swear words as they're driving in front of you, right? But in all seriousness, that's the test. The test is when you go to the supermarket. The test is when you go to the bank. The test is when you go to the gym. And somebody does something that you may not like, or says something that you may not agree with, right? Or go to work and you're dealing with that coworker that you're just like, oh my God, if this woman says one more freaking thing, like me and her, we're going at it, right? That's the start of really finding how to open up your heart.
And it's the hardest. And it's because, just what you said, we're in relation to everything. If you think of a relationship as just, we're in relation to our surroundings, to our bodies, we're in relation to our job, to the food that we have a relationship with everything we come into contact with. That person you meet in the grocery store, you're having a sort of relation when you have an exchange. And the most challenging thing is to, like we said, you can be single and alone and you're like, I'm the Buddha and I'm so at peace and everything's great. And then you walk down the street and you're like, fuck that guy. He just cut me off. I hate that guy. And it still amazes me how it's so visceral. Like when I get angry, it's like, whoosh, it's like it comes up through you. And in the moment, it's really challenging to have perspective. It's that reaction, right? And the annoying thing is that you only have those reactions because of what's inside of you. Someone
Mm.
who's super enlightened, I don't know how you get to this point. Again, it's like the Buddha, but you've tended to that, whether it's a wound, whether it's a fear, that charge is gone. So that when somebody does something annoying, you don't respond with anger and resentment. You respond with, oh, they must have been in a hurry. Like you
Mhm.
said, you bring love into it. Again, that's like way down the line of a very involved person. Most of
Yes.
us are still stuck in this place of, how do I deal with this feeling, especially when it's not just somebody on the street, but it is somebody in your family, in a relationship that you feel very wronged by, you feel hurt by, because the ultimate question is, can you be the love in this situation? Can you be the love? And there's a part of you that's going to say, no, I don't want it. They don't deserve it. And that's the big turning point that has to happen for people is, well, how are you able to let go of that need
Yeah.
to understand that people don't need to be, that no one has to deserve love. We just want to be able to give it to people.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't deserve the pain and the anger, right, that you're holding on to. You don't deserve that either, right? So it's like it's this catch 22, and you truly have to take a step back, and this is a good exercise that I did in a few years back, where I would look at everyone as like a 5-year-old child.
That's a wild thing to do. I've played around with that and it's like, oh my gosh, they're all like seeing them as all just little kids. You're like, oh, we're all so silly.
I know. It's really a great exercise. You can do this for a day. You don't have to do it for a whole week, but you can do it for a day and just see how your day goes when you start looking at people as little kids. Because you wouldn't get mad at a 5-year-old. A 5-year-old could throw a truck through a window, right, through the window in the house, and you would be upset, but you wouldn't jump all over him. You'd say, well, why'd you do that? Like, I was sorry, I was playing. I Well, we don't play like that, right? It's the same way, right? We wouldn't yell at them and scream at them, and some people may, but I wouldn't. But and these are the tests that come into our life, and there's no better test than having children. Even though I don't have my own, I have others that I've adopted, and it is truly a test to work with young children.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. That's going to be my new challenge from the next time I step out my door is if I feel that feeling coming up is to imagine them as a child that I would not ever be mean to or scream at, but just maybe asking questions is always helpful, right? Is there a
Right.
reason that you decided to do this? What was going on for you that you threw your truck through the window?
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I was angry that you didn't let me play. Oh, okay.
Yeah, understanding. That's what
Understand.
I always offer people is because one of the biggest points of anger is a lack of forgiveness. No, I can never forgive them for what they did. And what I've heard, and I actually got this in a meditation early on in my spiritual journey, was that forgiveness is the key that unlocks, or no, understanding is the key that unlocks resentment. It's what unlocks the lock to forgiveness. Because
Mm.
until we have an understanding, we hold on to this belief that they shouldn't have done this. And this was wrong and they wronged me. And I'm not, you know, belittling anyone's pain. It is true that we hurt and we have to work on that. And that deserves to be seen and heard and attended to. Yet, just as you said, being angry just hurts us. We don't deserve that. We don't deserve to walk around our life with that hot, fiery anger that feels horrible.
Yeah.
When you
Another.
understand, I was going to say, when you understand why somebody might have done something, it washes away that anger and you can forgive.
Yeah. Understanding is huge, but a lot of times we may not get the understanding, right? You may not
It's
be able.
true. It's true. You might never understand. You might not know you might not know the reason. It's true.
You may have
Good
had.
point. You called
You
me
may have
out.
had. Yeah. No. Listen. You may have been upset with a family member who passed away. You never get to speak to them. Right now, you're like holding on to like guilt and then resentment for not speaking to them about it. And you know, for me, the one thing that helped me with moving through that energy is that you have to remember that everybody is doing the best that they can. Truly, everyone's doing the best that they can. Otherwise, they would be doing something different. So if you understand that that's the absolute best that that person could have gave me at that time, you start to look at it a little bit differently. Because now you turn yourself from being the victim to not them being the victim, but actually them being someone that you have whole compassion for, right? And compassion can do wonders for you, right? Just like being grateful can do wonders for you. And so compassion is a huge leading mechanism of, hey, I understand where you're at. It's okay. I
Yeah.
understand where you're at. And I can't get mad at the person who cut me off on the freeway, right? If I pull up next to him and I see him, and perfect example. I was driving today, and this girl or swerves in front of me and then swerves over to the next line. And I'm like, almost like I felt a certain way. And this is another thing is we feel a certain way because we feel like that was supposed to be our spot, right?
Hmm.
Supposed to be my lane, but cut me off. It came too close, right? And then, I happen to see her through her side mirror, and she's sitting there, she's smoking cigarettes and just looks like she's having a chaotic morning. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know what she's going through. I don't know where she's coming from. I don't know if she's got an argument with someone. I don't know what's going on, but I hope you have a great day. Right. And that starts to open up a whole other side of what allows the universe to bring you. Because when you hold on to anger and you're holding on to tension or stress, you start blocking all the beautiful things that life's supposed to bring you. Right. And that's a big thing that I've been working on is staying open to the wonders of what can happen because anything can happen. Yet we have this finite box of what we think can happen. We're like, and then and so for me, it's like how can I stay open to not having an expectation on this is how it's supposed to go? Right. Like this podcast is a perfect example. I could have came on and said, these are all the things that I want to talk about today. And I just showed up and I said, whatever it's supposed to be, it's going to be. I'm just going to let it flow and I'm going to stay open to whatever the possibilities are that are supposed to happen right now. Right. So it's a subtler way of life. It's a smoother way of life. It allows you to stay in flow, but it also allows you to stay open to the opportunities of what greatness can happen in your life. And we're so focused on negativity because our mind is a negative being. It is a piece of or a system in our brain, in our body that blocks out all the goodness because it's so worried about what can go wrong, right? So an exercise that I highly recommend for most people who are dealing with stress or anxiety or just anyone who wants to start shifting the way that they think is wake up and do a meditation, 5 minutes. Close your eyes, either silence or put some music on, and think about what can go right today. Literally just sit there and think about for 5 minutes, what can go right today? What are all of the things that are happening today that can go right? And watch what starts happening with your day. It's such an easy exercise, yet it's some of the most profound things start to happen. It's crazy. I can just give you all the messages that people are like, oh my God, this happened.
Yeah. Well, it's that shift in perspective. And we usually find what we expect, right?
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
why something like, say, victim mentality is so detrimental because if you walk around the world thinking that you're going to be wronged and that you're always the victim, that's what you're going to find because we make our own reality. You can turn almost every situation into a situation where you've been wronged. Or
Exactly.
if you're looking at how things go right, you can look at the same situation and say, well, I didn't have to go to work today because my car broke down and I got to actually rest and relax. And what a great blessing. Beautiful. Fantastic. It went my way. So it really is, what we, like you said, where intention goes, energy flows, whatever the saying is.
Yeah. Where attention goes, energy flows. You said it right.
Yeah. So put your
Yep.
intention like everything's going great and it's going to keep going great. Oh, this thing happened and I'm going to see it as something that's perfect. Yeah. And it sounds, I know people who first hear that, they're like, get lost. That's no one acts that way. But it's just, it becomes, you live your life one of two ways, right? That nothing's working out or that everything's working out.
Exactly.
Right.
And that's your choice. Your choice is to choose what works out for you. And I for me, I don't look at whether it's working out or whether it's not. It's just what it's supposed to be. There's no
Yeah.
working, not working. I live my life in a paradox. I really do.
Most of us do.
Yeah. Most of us here do. I don't know about the rest of the world.
So before we wrap up, Bret, I would love for you to talk about something that you incorporate in your work that I actually haven't heard of. I haven't heard of this one. Maybe I have, I just didn't know the name of it, but you work with the Hermetic Principles. What are
Mhm.
those? Have we already spoken about it and I didn't realize it? Like, what is that related to?
Yeah, so Hermetic philosophy is what you're talking about, and um, Hermetic philosophy really goes all the way back to, I call it ancient Egypt, where Hermes, where and this is Greece, but when we work even further back from Egypt and go back to Atlantis, right? When Atlantis had its downfall, there was someone by the name of Hermes Trismegistus, which you may have heard of, who left Atlantis and landed in Kem, which was ancient Egypt. And in ancient Egypt, he's known as the Egyptian god Thoth, which is the god with the ibis, the bird on its head.
Yeah, the bird. Yep.
And in Greece, he's known as Hermes the god. Okay, from the research that I've done, he's the same person. Okay, but he brought all of the teachings from Atlantis to Egypt. So chemistry, right? Alchemistry, right? Brought that there. Philosophy, right? Psychology. Um, a lot of the principles that were advanced in Egypt, this was what came from that. So the Hermetic philosophy has come from that. So there's seven principles of the Hermetic philosophy, and I'm going to see if I can remember them all here. I think the biggest one that we should talk about, which I've mentioned, is mentalism, where the all, right? When we talk about the all, there can only be one, the all, and the all is within us all. It's this paradox. It's literally like philosophy, right? So, um, mentalism is that means that whatever you can think of, you can create. That is the main principle of mentalism, and your life is created based on this main principle, right? So if there was one principle that I would say you should know in Hermetic philosophy, it would be this principle of mentalism, right? And this is something that I've been practicing for a while now, but this is also the start of alchemy, right? When you start talking about alchemy and you know um, the Philosopher's Stone and all of that great stuff that is embodied in these teachings and that's gone through history. Okay, it all starts there. Next principle is the law of polarity, right? So meaning that there's different poles, right? As above, so below. You've heard that below
Oh
that
yeah.
before, right? And so this idea of polarity, right? The fact that there, the fact that there's a cause and an effect, right? Another law is the law of gender. Everything is masculine and feminine, right? So there's a masculine side and a feminine side. So, for instance, the universe is more masculine, whereas the earth is more feminine. Okay. So there's these philosophical teachings, and those are the main ones that I want to kind of hit on because those are I'd say the more important. I'd say probably the last one I would hit on is the principle of vibration, that everything vibrates, whether at a low frequency or an extremely high frequency, which is actually almost not vibrating because it's vibrating so high. It's almost like if you were going to look at a wheel on a car, if you were driving and you looked, on the freeway, it looks like the wheel's not even moving because
Mm-hmm.
it's going so fast, right? That's
Yeah.
a vibration. So everything vibrates, right? From a rock to the highest version of, let's call it a star, right? It vibrates at a specific frequency. And so when you understand that, the main, I'm not going to say goal, but when you understand that the higher you vibrate, the faster you leave this lower existence, you start to manipulate your energy to transmit a specific frequency that is above everything. And that's part of what alchemy is being able to take all energies and transmute them into the energy that you want, which is the mental side of things. And that's why everything is mental. So the relationship is mental. Your reality is mental. Your finances are mental. who you believe you are is mental. And so if there was one thing that you could change, it's not change your diet, it's not change your wardrobe, it's not to change your friends group, it's to change how you think about all of that. Right. And the ideas that come into your brain, the things that you think about, and then catching all of the negative things that are popping into your mind, because we all have them. Positive psychology says it takes 9 positive things to equal 1 negative thing. Right. So for every positive thing you hear, right, or excuse me, for every negative thing you hear, it takes 9 positive things to equal that. And that's not to exceed it, it's to equal it. So technically you need to hear 18 positive things. So if someone said that's ugly, right? Now you need 18 people to say you're beautiful. Right? So now you see why everybody lives in negativity, because our brain is focused that way. And so
Yeah.
that's the biggest step, is understanding that, but also understanding that you truly have the keys to your Ferrari, or your Lamborghini or whatever you want. Okay.
We
You
got
can
the
have
keys. We got the
Volkswagen.
keys. We got Gene Keys. We got the Hermetic Principle. We covered a lot today, Bret. We covered a lot. People have a lot of brain food to chew on after this episode.
Yeah, go eat something. If you guys have been listening to this, I'm sure you're hungry. Go get some food. Ground yourself.
Absolutely. Well, Bret, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. It was really fun to hear about your story, about your path, about your work. It's been a blast.
Whitney, do me a favor, right? Make sure you invite me back, because I had a blast.
I will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We have a lot more to discuss. Plus, you're always evolving, and your wisdom is going to get
Yeah.
zoomed out. You're going to have way more to share. You're going to be doing well, we have to follow your political career too. So
Oh, no, not yet. Not yet. I'm praying
I
that
know.
I'm praying it doesn't call me. But if it does, then I'll show up exactly how I'm supposed to.
So if people want to vote for you, or if they want to learn more about you, how can they find you?
Find me on Twitter. That's the best, or excuse me, Instagram. That's the best way. Bret_Lockett. And I'm pretty active. I always message people back if you guys have questions, or
He does. I did it. He does.
we can talk about whatever you want. We can talk about ancient aliens. We can talk about Gene Keys, whatever floats your boat, whatever brings you light, love, and happiness.
Fantastic. Thank you again so much, Bret. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Whitney. Talk soon.
Take care.